Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are breaking down the Green Bay Packers 2024 offseason. We're going to review all the departures, acquisitions, review their draft picks, and at the very end of the video, we are going to be going over their 2024 schedule and wrapping up with our record prediction for the Green Bay Packers this season. It's going to be a lot of fun. Packers were an amazing team to watch last year, and they're going to be fun to watch this season. So we're going to break it down. But before we do that, if you have not already, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the Tracy Take, and also ring that bell to get notified whenever new videos come out. We're in the middle of our off-season recap series, and so we have videos coming out every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And ring that bell to get notified, too. When the season starts, we're going to have weekly prediction videos for all of the Packers games that you're not going to want to miss. So like, subscribe, ring the bell. Ryan, let's pull these stats up here.
Let's do it.
So these stats are the 2023 team stats that we got off Pro Football Reference here. And in general, I would say if you just look at these stats, it looks like the Packers were just an average team, literally average, like slightly above average, offensively and defensively about average overall. I think those are very misleading. Yes, in those first 8 games, this team honestly was probably a below average team. It felt like the offense just really wasn't connected. Yeah. Defense, I think, had spurts and had good moments. Struggled a little bit in the secondary, but have a really good front seven. The second half of the season, especially starting at around, I would say that Detroit Lions game, I think, Thanksgiving, maybe even the week before. I don't know what it is, but this team, they figured it out. Matt LaFleur did an amazing job coaching. Jordan Love looked awesome. The offense looked unstoppable. Like the only way they seemed like they could get stopped was if they hurt themselves, or if I'm not mistaken, I would say really. Or Baker Mayfield, essentially, where like the only people Baker Mayfield had to throw a perfect game to beat them at Lambeau. This team was just on a roll, super fun to watch, and we got to see it in the playoffs here where they just stopped the Cowboys with one of the best offensive performances we've seen in the playoffs by any team. And honestly, then too, kind of going back to my point, they should have beat the 49ers. I think they were a better team than the 49ers, but they were just young and inexperienced. That's kind of what we thought might happen going into that game. And so this team is super young. We're going to get down into their depth chart here later on in the video. I want to throw it over to you, Ryan. What did you think of this Packers team last season, especially then too now? Yeah. Like, what do you think they needed to accomplish going into this 2024 offseason?
Yeah, I mean, for me, they were, at the end of the season, arguably the best team in the NFL. This was a really good defense in the last 8 games, a really good offense in the last 8 games. So I really liked what they put on the field. And this offense was this productive without their best playmaker in Christian Watson for a very large majority of the season.
Aaron Jones also too was out for a decent bit as well for majority of the season.
Yeah, and so for me, I think this defense really kind of came into its own. I love the fact that they were average in sacks. They had with 9th rated pass defense. I think that was a really good group there. I would love to see more turnovers, but I think some of the production or a lot of the production probably came in the second half of the year when this defense was making more plays. And then on the offensive side of the ball, for losing David Bakhtiari, especially at the beginning of the year, I think they did an extremely good job of protecting the passer with 3rd overall. That is only going to get better, I think, when we go through some of their free agent and draft additions section later. So to me, I think they really just needed to kind of round out some of the edges and smooth things out a little bit. But other than that, this team has a lot to be hopeful for this year, and I'm excited for them. I think this is going to be a really good team come 2024.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I was mistaken. Aaron Jones, he did miss 6 games, but he did end up playing it in 11 games. So more of the season than I thought. But it was that beginning part of the season, especially too. That was kind of when they really struggled, was when Aaron Jones was off the field. And this offense is so young. I think we looked at it. And I think all the starters outside of Aaron Jones was drafted by the Packers in 2020 or later, like offensively. Like, it was impressive how young they all were. And it's like, they're only going to keep getting better.
So all of their pass catchers last year were rookies, except for Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, if I'm not mistaken.
Or at minimum, there were 2-year guys. Yeah, at minimum.
Like their average offensive age, I think, was like in the early 20s. It was like 23 or 24, which is just insane for how productive they really were. So let's get into, you talked about Aaron Jones. Let's get into some of the departures here. So Aaron Jones, to me, probably the biggest one. that was actually like an elected move by this team. I'm sure as Packers fans are aware. He is 29, has been having some injury issues the past few seasons. A few other losses there: Jonathan Owens, John Runyon, Devondre Campbell, Darnell Savage. So they did lose actually a pretty good bit, I think. Just no true like star players, but I definitely think some contributors on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I would say the ones to me that kind of say it, losing John Runyon, and they addressed this here with their first overall pick that we'll get here in a second. I think that's probably the one. Just whenever you lose a starting offensive lineman, it's like how are you going to replace that hole? And I would say to losing Jonathan Owens and Darnell Savage, I think their secondary uh, needs to improve overall, and they made some moves as well that we'll address. So I just bring that up. Losing two guys that played a lot of valuable minutes. Jonathan Owens started in 11 games, played in all 17. And then Darnell Savage, where's Darnell Savage here? Just missed it. He ended up playing in 10 games before he got hurt. So still good, valuable minutes. And so losing those guys. Now they're both are veteran guys. Darnell Savage is only 26. But we'll get to that here in a second, where I don't think it's going to be as big a deal because of who they replace him with as well.
Yeah.
Aaron Jones, I get moving on from him. And then also to them, when you go get Josh Jacobs, who's a couple years younger and can do the exact same thing for you, I think that's going to be a great upgrade. Spoiler alert on some of their acquisition slides here. But in general, though, I think these were some necessary guys to move on. I get it, especially, too, with how good the team is. I think that they use the money and the money that they had to re-sign players that they needed to keep, and also signed on some good players to help replace what they lost.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about this on this channel, and I don't think it applies when you're talking about star players or like quarterbacks or people who really make like big impacts. But when you're talking about the Darnell Savages, like, yes, he is going to contribute to an NFL roster. To me, those guys are a little bit more plug and play than if you were to have like a Tyrann Mathieu in his prime or something like that. So losing guys like this, I think, is a little bit moot, especially when kind of moving on to the free agent signings. You go get Josh Jacobs to replace Aaron Jones. You go get Xavier McKinney to go and replace Darnell Savage. And then the only two other signings were Andre Dillard and Greg Joseph by this team. So not a whole lot of signings, but they had a ton of draft picks as well. So starting off, Jordan Morgan right there, and then Javon Bullard, the safety from Georgia. So offensive line and tackle again, or offensive line and defensive back again, two pretty much top 50, top 60 picks there as well to go and add to this roster. So all in all, like, yes, they lost pieces, but they replaced those pieces specifically in free agency, and then added at the very least really, really solid depth behind them in the draft.
Well, and even to including Adrian Cooper there, those first three picks, as we'll get to here in a second, are going to be providing some serious minutes for this team as well. But I think to kind of quickly going, because we'll talk about Jordan Morgan here in a second, but adding Andre Dillard, and then they go get Jacob Monk as center, and then also they had Travis Glover as well from Georgia State, if I'm not mistaken, as well. And I think it's just good offensive line depth, and what we've seen even as well from some of their draft picks, that they've hit on several day 3 or day 2 and day 3 offensive line draft picks. So I think they can go and develop these guys and keep providing that good depth moving forward. So I know, like, they moved on from John Runyon. They moved on from Yash Nijman. I think I pronounced that correctly. But I think they go replace guys with similar talents, or at least have a similar projection as well for the time being. And I think improved on the running back room. Like Aaron Jones, I think, is very similar to Alvin Kamara. So he's still going to be able to provide good minutes because he is a 3-down back. I think Josh Jacobs is going to have a little bit more of that explosiveness, especially more in the running game. So I'm curious to see how he does as well. Xavier McKinney, I think, is your Darnell Savage or your Jonathan Owens replacement. So I think it's, to your point, that plug and play. But I really think their acquisitions and then their draft class, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they go and develop as well. I think they're going to be a fun team. They didn't really need too much to add on. I mean, they lost a couple pieces and they replaced them. So I think it's going to be fun to see how this Packers team keeps on developing, because They develop. If this young team, a core group of guys that they had last year, keeps developing and they hit on some of these other draft picks, I mean, we could be looking at another. This is way too early to say, but like another potential dynasty, just because all those guys are going to be on very team-friendly contracts for a very long time.
Well, and also too, like one guy we haven't mentioned that I was pretty high on coming into the class was Marshawn Lloyd. I think he is going to be a great second complement back to Josh Jacobs. They do still have A.J. Dillon. I don't think that this looks good for him being re-signed potentially, but all in all, like this is a really good young team. The Packers over the last 3 or 4 years have been one of the best drafting teams in the NFL, and I think it's really starting to pay dividends there.
Yeah.
So
it makes it really funny too. Then when we complain about their like QB decisions or whatnot, like they're on their third quarterback in 30 years. No, 40 years, something like that.
So
it's like I think they know what we're doing. But then of course you have Monday morning quarterbacks like us that like, what are the Packers doing?
So I will say I'm a Patriots fan, and Elliott Wolf is his father is a very famous Packers GM, and Elliott Wolf is now basically the GM of the Patriots. And so in his first press conference, one of the first questions that he was ever asked as like the EVP of player personnel for the Patriots was, so the Packers have had a lot of great success with drafting quarterbacks. Like how have they kept doing that? And his answer was luck. Like he's like, they got like luck. They got lucky. And,
well, that's true actually, yeah, because they didn't even draft Brett Favre.
The Falcons did, and then they traded him.
So that's what you're saying. As a Falcons fan, we've been unlucky with our quarterbacks. I was kidding. Matt Ryan is a Hall of Famer, in my opinion.
If you draft Brett Favre and then trade him before he's good, I don't think that's luck. I think that's stupidity. But
that was the joke, of course.
Yeah.
But I think though, to your point, Marshawn Lloyd, I think that's what's going to be fun is if we move on to their depth chart here as we kind of analyze, because I think Marshawn Lloyd fits in perfectly to the type of offensive system that Matt LaFleur set up, that heavy motion offense with all that speed. That's what we saw in the second half of the season. Because I'm just looking at the starting roster now, like with Watson, Dobbs, and Reed. Those three guys right there are going to be ridiculously fast. And then you had great receiving tight end in Luke Musgrave. But Tucker Kraft also had a good season as well. I mean, there's just so many skilled position players here. Now you had Josh Jacobs, who I think is an improvement on Aaron Jones. Not by much, nothing against Aaron Jones. But Marshawn Lloyd, I think, also fits really well into this system, especially as like a third down running back. And I just like, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're like, how do you guard all these guys? Not to mention, too, Dontavian Wicks had a good season. Then he still had Samori Toure. Also, Bo Melton had a couple touchdowns. And I think I'm probably even forgetting a couple of guys that had scored. And it's just a lot of weapons, and they just all fit perfectly in that Matt LaFleur offense.
Yeah, and he does such a great job of scheming things up. If you haven't watched our Vikings video yet, go check it out. But I gave Kevin O'Connell a lot of praise for being able to scheme up guys and going through all of those injuries. How about Matt LaFleur for drafting Jordan Love late in the first round, developing him, getting through the first half of the season where there was a lot of trouble in Green Bay, and getting Jordan Love and keeping him on the right path and keeping this offense as explosive as it was. And then also you come out on Thanksgiving Day against Detroit, and I want to say, was it a trick play to Christian Watson, or was it just like
I can't remember.
Yeah, but immediately throwing the ball deep down the field to Christian Watson, like what he's been able to do as well, I think speaks a lot. And to be fair, they've done a really good job drafting, but none of that comes together if it's not coached and schemed up properly. So even this offensive line, I would be very curious to see if Jordan Morgan goes over to left guard where Elgton Jenkins currently is. But I was saying throughout the entire draft process to me that he is a guard, but just kind of have to wait and see how that all plays out. I think this offensive line is going to be really solid again. There's really not a lot of changeover.
Yeah, well, and that's where I think it's going to be the biggest thing is just how this offensive line shakes up. Because drafting Jordan Morgan, And I will say one thing too. I know Packers fans will be, because I like watching Tom Grossi as well. I'm sure all Packers fans are probably following him. But his live reaction to them drafting Jordan Morgan over Graham Martin, I think that's going to be the story that is going to be kind of followed throughout the whole season. Was that the right pick or was it not the right pick?
Yeah.
So that to me, I think is going to be the storyline. It's really just kind of how this offensive line shakes up as well. But then you got Andre Dillard, who didn't have a great season at Tennessee, but still I think could be a good swing tackle as well. Then just how some of these other guys that they drafted in the day 3, like Jacob Monk, just adding more depth. How does the backup offensive lineman kind of shake up when it comes to 53-man roster? I think that's what's going to be most interesting about the offensive depth chart.
No, yeah, I 100% agree that offensive line, I think it will be solid, but just kind of figuring out where all the pieces fit together is going to be really important. So let's move on to the defensive depth chart here. Again, I don't really have too many like questions or moving parts. I think Javon Bullard slotted in there at the free safety spot, and Edrin Cooper taking over for Devondre Campbell in that middle linebacker spot next to Quay Walker. I think that's going to be a good linebacker room, very athletic and pretty good size as well. And no change on the front 4. I mean, all in all, I think this is just going to be another good year for this Packers defense.
Yeah, no, their front 4. I mean, this is what I love to see them too, because they amongst the front 4, and then I'll include Lucas Van Ness, but 9 sacks, 8 sacks, 7.5, 5.5, and 4. And then Carl Brooks, even as well, another backup defensive tackle, had 4 sacks. So great spread amongst. It's not all lopsided like we did the Jags video, and it was like Josh Allen had 17 sacks, Trayvon Walker had 10, and like the next guy was like 2 or 2.5 or something like that, or maybe 3. So it was very lopsided on who had the production, and so that's what I love about this Packers defense, especially on that front 4, including the front 7. And so I think the thing for me when watching the kind of how this defense, the depth chart, how this defense shakes up during training camp, is how that secondary meshes together. Because I mean, Jair Alexander was their number 1 corner, but it really felt like last year they were kind of a big liability. That being said, though, too, in the second half of the season, they did get into some shootouts. So a lot of teams were pressing hard and throwing the ball a lot against them. So maybe they were just playing prevent. So that could be part of it. But just seeing how big of an impact David McKinney brings in when he first gets in there, as Eric Stokes able to kind of develop and be a good number 2, how does Javon Bullard end up doing? I think there's going to be some good competition and some opportunity to play outside of Jair Alexander. I think he's the guy who's like, no, you're good. Like you're not going to be your spot's not really up of any concern. And so, but defensively though, and we've said this a lot kind of during this offseason to recap, is I'd much rather have a dominant defensive front and then a potentially weaker secondary than vice versa. Because if you're able to get after the passer, then I think that's what's really going to help out a lot. I think that's what helped out a lot with their overall team statistics and numbers. Like they had the 9th best passing defense last year. I think a lot of it was because they were able to get a lot of pressures. And even too, I'll say that just to kind of wrap up, when it comes to their defensive numbers as well. Let me just double check here. So their pressure percentage, looking at Green Bay. When it comes to pressure percentages, they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th overall in the league last year with 24.3%. So 1 out of every 4 times opponents dropped out to pass, they had good pressure on them. So I think that helped a lot with the secondary. And maybe I'm wrong. Leave a comment down below, but I felt like the secondary was a little bit vulnerable if it was for how good that front 7 really were.
Yeah, I think outside of Jair Alexander, who I believe struggled with some nagging injuries last year.
Nagging injuries,
this secondary was not that great. It also might be part of the reason why they moved on from Darnell Savage and maybe changed the back end of this defense a little bit. So, all in all, I think this is going to be a good defense for the Packers. They added a few new pieces to that back end. So if that can even step up its game a little bit, that's even scarier for the rest of this NFC. So let's get into their schedule here. Starting off here with the first 6 games. They're going to kick off week 1 in Brazil against Philadelphia. Then they get to come back home, have their home opener against Indiana. Then they travel to Tennessee, then Minnesota at home, then at LA, and then they play Arizona. To me, I look at this. they really should probably start 6-0.
It
If
is possible. I think their toughest game is going to be the Rams, and I think
yeah,
Cardinals are going to be sneaky. But I mean, anything can happen week one in Brazil. Like, if we're being
yeah,
completely honest, and so, but I would think on paper and kind of how both teams ended the 2023 season, and even kind of what they did in the offseason, I'm going to pick the Packers in that game,
yeah,
barring any major injuries between now and then. Indianapolis, I think, can be up in the air, but this is going to be the first home game. See how Anthony Richardson ends up doing. I think that they are also a good matchup against that Colts secondary. But then I agree. I go like Tennessee, Minnesota. I think they're just better than them.
yeah.
The Rams. I think that's going to be really fun to watch. That could be a potential NFC Championship uh, uh,
Preview.
preview. I would say with how both these
Yeah,
teams are developing. In Arizona, I think could be sneaky. I do agree with you though. This is a very favorable portion of their schedule. I think their season really starts to heat up with week sevens down to, well, actually just this whole middle section. Go to Houston, Jacksonville's a potential playoff team. Detroit, obviously, that's going to be a big rivalry. Both these teams are going to be fighting for the division. Chicago, after their bye week, a lot of hype around them with the offseason that they had. San Francisco, obviously, going to be a big revenge match as well because they're the ones who eliminated them. Miami, and then Detroit as well. So like this middle section right here, like this is the heart. This is
yeah,
playoff central right here. You know, we're really going to see how good this Packers team is. Is they're head and shoulders above everybody else, or if they're just going to be another like good playoff team. But just going to need some help
yeah.
if they want to make it far in the playoffs.
Yeah, my biggest thing with this part of the schedule is they have the perfect bye week. So they have 6 easy games, 2 tough games, and then Detroit, which is going to be an essential game if they wanted to win this division. Then a bye week. Then they have a tune-up game against Chicago right before they host San Francisco, who they really should have beat in the playoffs last year. Then you have a short week going to Miami on Thanksgiving night. And then you have a long week to come back, or I guess you have a full week to come back against Detroit the next week, who I guess also will have a Thanksgiving Day game. So
Yeah.
now that I think about it, maybe it's not as much of an advantage, but still, it's to me that bye is perfectly placed. They have a tune-up game right before San Francisco, and then so I think that's a good spot. And then week 15 through 18 at Seattle, New Orleans, at Minnesota, they should win all of those. They probably will be favored against Chicago, but we'll kind of have to see where Chicago is at this point in the season because who knows where Caleb Williams has this team, how's this defense playing, and is that running game as good as it was last year? There's a lot of questions revolving around Chicago. So
Well, and that's going to be a very unique game, that Week 18 game, because based off our projections, Chicago is going to be fighting for a wild card spot, and Green Bay is going to be fighting for the division and also potentially home field advantage. So that game
yeah,
could be absolutely huge for both of those teams. So that's going to be one that could definitely be one that can be what's it called when they make it a night game?
flexed.
Flex, yeah. And so that could absolutely be a flex Sunday night football game to end the season, just because, and also the two with the rivalries as well. So I will say, I think you're selling some of the teams in the beginning a little short. I say because you mentioned easy schedule. It is easier, but there are still some
Yeah,
potential playoff teams. But to your point, though, they're literally Houston, Detroit, San Francisco. I'll throw Miami in there. I'm being very liberal with this, I guess, but potential
yeah,
Super Bowl candidates, I would say, and they play Detroit twice in there. And
yeah,
so I think that's going to be a very tough portion of the schedule. And Jacksonville and Chicago are going to be no slouches either, so I think
yeah,
that definitely is the meat of they can get through there. And then Seattle, who knows? New Orleans, they should beat handedly, especially that
yeah.
time of the season. New Orleans is going to have another 8-9 type season. And then Minnesota, and then also too, as I already talked about, Chicago. So it's going to be a very fun season for the Packers fans. Expectations, I think, are extremely high for the team,
Yeah.
and they're going to be high for us as we get to our record predictions here in a second.
Yeah, and that's to kind of talk a little bit about the teams in the beginning. It's not that I don't like some of what those teams have done. I just think the Packers should beat them. They should beat all of those teams.
Relative
And,
to that middle portion of the season, yeah, they are.
yeah.
they're better than those teams. I agree.
Yeah,
But
and oh no, and maybe especially early on in the season, teams win games that they probably shouldn't, and they give things away. But I think if you're the Packers, I would rather start out with Philadelphia and Brazil, which is technically an away game, uh, even though like both teams have to travel there, obviously. Then Indiana, Tennessee, Minnesota, rather than Houston, at Jacksonville, Detroit, and then at Chicago. The first 4 games are much easier in terms of strength of opponent than the other, and so I guess that's more like where I was coming from.
no, I understand exactly what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be unlike some of these other teams where they start off and they just get punched in the mouth immediately. I think they can ease their win. I think another thing that helps out too is 2 of those first 3 games are AFC opponents, so not too many tiebreakers are going to come in for either like division or conference lead. So they can kind of work their way up, and then Minnesota too on paper as well. They should be better than, so they should get some tiebreakers if they win those first 4 games, and if they lose them, it just helps out maybe later on in the season to some of their tie breaks, so they don't have to do what they did last year and kind of run the table towards the end of the season. But let's get into our record predictions. Let's wrap this up here. And so I actually have Lions video is going to be coming out tomorrow when you're watching this video. And so I actually have the Packers winning the division. I had them beating the Lions by a game, going 12-5. I think even as well, just with how they ended the season, I also think they would have beaten if they would have beat the Niners in the championship game. I think they would have beat the Lions. Sorry, in the divisional game, I think they would have beat the Lions in the championship game, just with how they played and beat them on Thanksgiving night early in the year. It's how they were playing overall. That offense was just unstoppable. And I think in general, I think they're going to continue that momentum. I don't think they're going to have as slow of a start as they did last year because it was Jordan Love's first season as a starter. Super young receiving room as well. So I think it's going to be I think they're going to jumpstart right off the bat. And I think with the motion that Matt LaFleur has in that offense, I think that they're going to start off really well. I think their defense is going to stay about where they are and maybe even improve a little bit in the secondary. And I think that they're going to be 12-5 around that range and fighting for home field advantage. But if you get home field advantage and teams have to go up to Lambeau in January, that's not fun. That's absolutely not fun.
No, and that's a huge advantage. So I went with 11-6. I think how I mapped it out, as I said, they probably went 5-1 through the first 6 games, then 4-3 through the next, and then I gave 1 game through 15, 16, 17. But the way I had it worked out was that if in week 18 the Lions would have already had the division one.
Yeah.
And so then they would take that as a bye week and then do it that way. So that's why I went with 11-6, simply because that last week didn't matter in the scenario that I played out. And so this is a really, really good football team. And the biggest thing for me that I liked was they made a lot of mistakes early last year, and they just kind of continued to build. It was a process. It was a 17-week-long or 18-week-long process that they built over and over each week. And at the end of the year, this team was the best. I'm going to say the best team in the league, because they should have beat San Francisco. They left a lot of plays on the field. They just absolutely demolished Dallas, and that was a top 8 defense last year, top 5 defense, I think.
That was close. Yeah, they're good.
And so all in all, I just think this is a really good football team. I have them; they're the 5th seed in the NFC this year. So and they'll probably get a favorable divisional round matchup.
They'll probably play the Falcons, actually. That might be.
Yeah, or well, they might play the NFC East.
They could do the NFC East. Actually, yeah, because we had the Cowboys and Eagles going 9-8. So I guess whoever that would be.
It would probably be that, and then they would demolish. I think
they probably would. Again. So, but it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, this Packers team. It's just going to be fun to watch because I love that Matt LaFleur offense that he had and just this motion. It was frankly, it was kind of. I mean, not to be weird about it, but it's like beautiful to watch. Like you see all this different motion, and you just see these defenses. You're just like, yeah, like we have no idea what they're doing. And it was really just kind of like an artist, just like painting his stroke of like all the receivers running their routes, just getting open, and it was gorgeous to watch. It did remind me of the Falcons offense when Kyle Shanahan was there and they made that Super Bowl run. It just felt like defenses couldn't do anything. It's like they could have told them to play, and defenses still wouldn't have been able to stop it. Matt Ryan would have been able to find somebody open. It's like Jordan Love would have been able to find somebody open. And so it's just going to be, can they just learn from their mistakes in San Francisco? Because if they continue to get better and just keep on making those positive strides forward, I don't see how anybody's really going to stop this offense.
No, I agree. And then I think you couple it with a growing defense that is going to revamp the back end of it to potentially be even better than they were in the second half of last season. I think it is even scarier. So all in all, I think the Packers, they have a really positive outlook. They should be contending for the division, and I think that they are going to be a Super Bowl contender this year. So let's go ahead and wrap it up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Green Bay Packers 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? And other than that, we will see you guys next time.